This is happening at the Crucible in Sheffield right now. World number one, Judd Trump, is losing 2-1 to Sean Murphy, while on the other table, Mark Selby, you can see, is 3-0 up against Mark Williams at the moment. You can keep up to date with that, of course, on our website and on BBC Two. But that is all the sport for now. I'll have more for you in the next hour, Ben.
See you then, Kat. Thank you. Tributes have been paid today to a man who died after jumping into the River Thames in central London to rescue a woman. Jimmy Olubunmi entered the water on Saturday night when he saw the woman fall from London Bridge. Well, she was pulled to safety, but his body was recovered 6 hours later. His friends and family have described him as a hero, and they've called for him to be honoured. John Donnison reports.
Tributes for a young man considered by many a modern-day hero. Jimmy Olubunmi Adewale dived into the Thames at night to try and save a stranger. She was rescued along with another man who also jumped in. Jimmy's parents, heartbroken, told us they wanted to talk about how proud they were of their son.
He's my friend. Even if I'm at home, he always comes to me and we are really friends.
This is my son, Claude. I can't sleep since Friday. I use this cloth to cover myself. I'm smelling Father Jimmy's body on this cloth.
Jimmy's friend Bernard was with him and saw what happened.
I could hear Jimmy screaming my name. It was just pitch black everywhere. And I was just trying to see if I could see him. He just kept screaming my name. I got on the cliff. All I could hear was my name. It's just echoing.
At Jimmy's old school this week, pupils and teachers gathered to clap for 2 minutes in celebration of his life and his sacrifice.
Jumping into the Thames at that time of night would have been a terrifying thing to have done, but that just demonstrates that the level of spirit and bravery that this young man has, and we don't have many modern day heroes, and I truly do believe that Jimmy is one of them.
And Jimmy's former boss at the restaurant where he used to work also paid tribute to his bravery.
What was going on in his mind when he decided to make that leap and get into the water, thinking he could do it? I mean, this is not just a normal, person. This takes somebody incredibly kind, incredibly brave, and incredibly selfless to do that.
And Jimmy's family are calling for him to be officially honoured.
I want my son to be honoured and appreciated for what he has been doing. To rescue someone inside the river, and my son died there. I want my son to be appreciated and honoured.
A young man who gave his life to save another. John Donnison, BBC News.
Every lockdown fine handed out should be reviewed, according to a committee of MPs. They say the system is muddled, discriminatory and unfair. Well, more than 85,000 fixed penalty notices have been issued in England since the pandemic began, with 8,000 in Wales. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly has been explaining about the issue.
Now, this committee of MPs is made up, so I should say, not just of MPs, there's members of the House of Lords on there as well, all parties, so it's a real cross-section. They say one of the basic problems is that the system is not clear legally, which poses difficulties for the police. And then they say the system's now been in place obviously for about a year. They say that it's prejudice, they believe, against certain groups, notably the poor, the young and some ethnic minorities. And they say the reason why they're saying that is because if you don't or can't pay the fine, you then have to go to court. And they are saying that's how people are ending up in the court system. They're also quoting stats that say those who've ended up in the court system, a quarter of those cases have actually been thrown out of court, which the peers and MPs would say underlines the fact that there are problems with the system, that basically people are being having action taken against them where they shouldn't be. So that's what they say. The whole system is completely wrong and needs a review.
All right, so that's what the MPs and the peers are saying. What do the government say in response to that? Is there likely to be any review of all these fines?
Well, certainly the mood music, no. I would say what the government says is that they've worked closely with the police throughout the pandemic to get the system going. And they say it's right, the quote is that it's right that those who are very obviously breaching the rules should face the consequences. Their point is that most people have been following the rules. Why should people who they say are not following the rules, why shouldn't they be punished?
June Kelly, our Home Affairs correspondent. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's local MP has criticised what she's called the Prime Minister's dismal failure, which she said has led to the British-Iranian aid worker facing more time in prison in Iran. A month ago, she completed a 5-year jail sentence, but yesterday, Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe was sentenced to another 12 months in prison. Well, her local MP, Labour's Tulip Siddiq, made her comments after a statement in the Commons by the Foreign Office Minister, James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, as the news unfolded yesterday, I watched with great interest as the Prime Minister talked about redoubling his efforts to get Nazanin home and how he was working as hard as he possibly could to secure her release. If the Prime Minister is watching now, I would like to ask him what efforts has he put into trying to release Nazanin in the first place? Because from where I'm standing, I've seen no evidence on part of the Prime Minister so far. At the heart of this tragic case is the Prime Minister's dismal failure to release my constituent and to stand up for her, and his devastating blunder in 2017 when he was Foreign Secretary, when he exposed his complete ignorance of this tragic case and put more harm in Nazanin's way. The Prime Minister did not even arrange UK officials to attend Nazanin's recent court hearing, which might have ensured that she got a free and fair trial. He still hasn't got his government to pay the £400 million debt that we as a country owe Iran. And Mr. Speaker, we MPs might be many things, but we are not naive. We cannot deny the fact that Nazanin was handed a fresh new sentence a week after the IMS debt court hearing was delayed. Bearing this in mind, I'd like to ask the Minister a few questions, and I would really appreciate some proper answers from him. Will the Minister acknowledge that Nazanin is being held hostage by Iran and is a victim of torture? In light of the recent adjournment of the IMS debt hearing scheduled for last week, what is the government doing to ensure the debt is paid promptly?
I completely understand the passion with which the Honourable Lady speaks, and I can hear the anger and frustration in her voice. However, her anger and frustration is misdirected because Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and the other British dual nationals held in arbitrary detention are being held by Iran. It is on them. The situation with regard to the charges that have been recently brought against other British dual nationals, and indeed the sentence that has been brought down for Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe are because of Iran. And it should be towards Iran that we direct our attention. With regard to Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe's treatment, our priority has always been her full release and her ability to return home to the UK. The UK does not and will never accept our dual nationals being used as diplomatic leverage. And we recognise that her treatment has been completely unacceptable. It is totally inhumane and wholly unjustified. And we call upon Iran to allow Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe to return home to the UK and to release from detention all British dual nationals that are being held.
James Cleverly there, the Foreign Office Minister. The government is demanding that former postmasters wrongly prosecuted for theft should be compensated as soon as possible after the Horizon accounting system scandal. Last week, judges quashed the convictions of 39 former postmasters. Well, there are now calls which are growing for a full judge-led public inquiry into what many people have called one of the UK's biggest miscarriages of justice. And this afternoon, the Business Minister Paul Scully told the House of Commons that lessons must be learned.
In response to the Court of Appeal judgment, the Post Office has apologised for serious failings in historical prosecutions. Tim Parker, the Post Office chair, has said the Post Office is extremely sorry for the impact on the lives of those postmasters and their families that was caused by historical failings. The government recognises the gravity of the court's judgment in these cases and the hugely negative impact the convictions have had on individual postmasters and their families, as has been highlighted on a number of occasions in this place. The journey to get to last Friday's Court of Appeal judgment has unquestionably been a long and difficult one for affected postmasters and their families, and the government pays tribute to their courage and tenacity in pursuing their fight for justice. The government also pays tribute to colleagues across the House who have campaigned tirelessly on their behalf. But whilst the Court of Appeal decision represents the culmination of years of efforts by these postmasters, it's not the end of the road. The Horizon dispute has been long running, and for the benefit of everyone involved, it's important that the inquiry reaches its conclusion swiftly, and I look forward to receiving Sir Wynn's report later this summer. As the Prime Minister said, lessons should and will be learned to ensure that this never happens again.
This government has consistently failed to stand with the postmasters in their quest for justice. Investigations delayed, claims denied, and not one word of explanation or apology as to why government let it take so long to clear these innocent victims. And now, to add insult to injury, the government is failing to deliver the proper statutory public inquiry that postmasters, their families, and the British public deserve. Because let us be clear, Mr. Speaker, Friday's judgment vindicates the postmasters, but to deliver justice, we need a statutory inquiry with genuine subpoena and witness compulsion powers and a specific remit to consider compensation claims. Whilst we have the greatest respect for Sir Wyn Williams, his inquiry has no real powers, and key questions about compensation, the criminal prosecutions of postmasters, and the responsibility of civil servants and government are outside its remit. As such, the inquiry is toothless and may even lead to whitewash. Postmasters have been clear that they will fail to recognise and participate in such an inquiry. How can the Minister stand there with the wreck of hundreds and hundreds of lives before him and say this scandal does not warrant a statutory inquiry?
You're watching BBC News. Look at our latest headlines now. There's no let up for the Prime Minister, with more questions being raised over who paid to renovate his Downing Street flat. The ministers are supporting Boris Johnson.
Test the live stream 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope it's doing okay. Hello, Boris. I'm going to have another cup of coffee.
And other COVID restrictions adversely affect the speech development of young children, and some schools are now offering additional support. Back now to one of our main stories this afternoon, that growing evidence that coronavirus restrictions and lockdowns have adversely affected the language skills of young children. That study finding that reduced social interaction and wearing of face coverings in public have deprived youngsters of experiences essential for increasing vocabulary. Well, Victoria Day is an assistant head teacher in Birmingham. She's helped us put together this short film with 5 tips showing how you can help your kids with their language.
My top tips to support your children with their communication and language would be: tip 1, have a conversation with your children about something that interests them. If they're playing, chat to them, chatter away with them.
What about you, Harry?
Tip 2, is read with them. Make the most of stories, whether it's information books or fairy tales, because they're jam-packed full of rich vocabulary, which will enable your children to thrive. Tip 3 is give them lots of experiences, whether it's taking them to the park or into the garden, because that will give them and give you opportunities to develop their vocabulary, because with new experiences brings about new vocabulary. Tip 4 is question. Question, comment, explain and expand their vocabulary.
Well, that's giant.
It looks giant through your
magnifying glass. Giant.
Well, it does through your magnifying glass.
Why did it work me everywhere?
And my final tip, tip 5, is to sing with your children. Enjoy rhymes. because through rhyming and singing we can develop their vocabulary.
There are 5 tips from Victoria Day, an assistant head teacher in Birmingham. Well, Imran Hussain is Director of Policy and Campaigns at the children's charity Action for Children, and I asked him how he felt about the impact of the pandemic on children's development.
I think we're incredibly worried about what's happening to children as a result of the pandemic. As you heard there, what we saw was the world changed for parents and children last year. Children weren't going on play dates. They weren't experiencing the world in the way they would normally experience the world. And we know that children develop and learn by experiencing the world, by asking questions, by having fun and talking to people. And so that damage has been done, and I think it should be a matter of a national priority for us to kind of fix it and protect these children.
Some people watching you might say, well, yeah, but young kids, they're resilient. They'll get through this, they'll get over it, they'll bounce back. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, children are resilient, but but we know that they learn through interacting, and if you stop that interaction, then the effect on those children is very real, and I think there is evidence actually that the harm, that interruption to their education is not clawed back easily. So I think that's the problem. So we're going to have fewer children who are going to be school ready, and if they're not school ready, then clearly that's going to have an impact on their childhoods and on their school life, their education, and that in turn will have an impact on their life chances. So this stuff matters, and this generation of children, particularly these young children have been born or preschool while the lockdown was happening. This stuff really matters for them, and if we don't get it right, then they will be living with the consequences of it for a number of years, and we'll be seeing that as well.
That's Imran Hussain from the children's charity Action for Children. 5 people have been arrested after police in Warwickshire found a suspected amphetamine laboratory during a raid this morning. Officers from the National Crime Agency and Warwickshire Police discovered what they believe to be a large-scale operation to produce the drug. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons.
A sizable property in rural Warwickshire, the end of a long investigation. 2 people arrested here. Dozens of police and National Crime Agency officers carried out this early morning raid, backed up by a chemicals expert and the fire brigade, because in this outhouse they were expecting to find a meth lab. There was a faint escaping vapour. That may be from the highly toxic process used to make methamphetamine. It's rare for police to discover a meth lab in the UK. They're more likely to appear in episodes of the hit series Breaking Bad.
The type of equipment and chemicals used aren't easy to obtain. To use them safely and to obtain the end product of methamphetamine is very, very complex. It takes someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Laboratories that have been encountered overseas, they tend to be operated by someone who's a trained scientist.
This investigation and many others across Britain started with the hacking of an encrypted phone network called EncroChat by French police. The messages they obtained were passed to British police and they started analysing them. They say that in general the suspects were unaware that their messages were being read and they discussed their activities openly. The substances present in this building are potentially so dangerous, only firefighters with breathing gear are going in. It could take hours before it can be made safe. Tom Simons, BBC News, Warwickshire.
This is the closest I'm ever going to get to being on Mastermind. Last night, a 24-year-old student from Glasgow became the youngest person ever to win the BBC's famous quiz show. Jonathan Gibson triumphed in the grand final after scoring a perfect 11 out of 11 in his specialist subject round on the comedy songwriting duo Flanders and Swan. And by the way, it was John Humphrey's very last episode after 18 years as the host. Is our arts correspondent David Sillerton.
Cooling the blood.
Yes.
Lister.
Yep.
January brings the snow.
Yes. What form of humour was he referring to?
Satire.
Is correct.
Jonathan Gibson.
Dodgers.
Yes.
Student.
Genus.
Yes.
24 years old.
Louisiana Poachers.
Yeah. In 20.
And the youngest ever mastermind champion.
You have now a total of 28 points.
The response from everyone has been overwhelmingly lovely. I just feel so incredibly lucky, and yeah, it's great. It feels like a dream.
This history PhD student from Glasgow, his accent is a mystery even to his own family, developed a love of his specialist topic, Flanders and Swan's 50-year-old comic songs, when he was 7.
I'm in the mood. How do you do?
He's also appeared on University Challenge.
Saladin?
Saladin is right.
But Mastermind is a rather different quizzing experience.
I felt so incredibly nervous. I was worried I might look like I was about to pass out. But yeah, I think that just once you're in the chair and once John is reading the questions, you just try and focus on one question at a time.
Jonathan is the 2021 Mastermind champion.
The grand final also marked another little landmark. It was John Humphrey's 735th and final show. The previous record for the youngest Mastermind champion lasted 28 years. The new presenter, a TV journalist and presenter by the name of Clive Myrie, may have to ask a lot of questions before this record is broken again. David Soletto, BBC News.
Congratulations to him. Great achievement. Well done. Congratulations to John Humphreys as well. After 18 years in the chair, Clive Myrie, of course, taking over. And let's look at the weather now. Here's Louise Lear.
Good afternoon. It's the 27th of April, but I can't believe this is the first time this month I'm using the phrase April showers. Yes, there are some, with this weather front slowly sinking its way south and west today. To the north of that front, we've got a few more isobars on the charts. That's where the strongest of the winds are going to be. Gusts perhaps in the sharper showers of 30 to 40 miles an hour. So we've seen some weather watcher pictures sent in of showers. This was Edinburgh just a few hours ago, and you can see how extensive the cloud and the showers are. Not too intense at the moment, but there's a real rash driving in off the North Sea coast, and they will filter a little bit further west. Now, there is a decent break in the clouds through Bristol over towards Suffolk. That's where the best of the sunshine is likely to be. Those showers continuing through this afternoon, maybe one or two heavier ones with the odd rumble of thunder and hail mixed in there. So the best of the sunshine obviously brings the best of the warmth, 16 degrees, but on that northeast exposed coast, once again, the temperature's struggling, 7 to 9 Celsius. These temperatures generally down on where they should be for this time of year. Now our showers and our clouds sink their way steadily south through the night tonight. Some clearer skies in Scotland, and that's where we'll see the lowest of the temperatures, but still holding up above freezing quite widely across the country. So not quite as chilly a start to Wednesday morning, but once again there's going to be some cloud and some showers around. This time that front will be sitting through central and southern Wales along with the Midlands and down across the south coast. The isobars open up further north. That means lighter winds, but that could mean that some of those showers may just linger across the far northeast of Scotland. So nevertheless, it could be a little more disappointing tomorrow, and those temperatures struggling again for this time of year, way below par. We're going to see a maximum of 8 to 14 Celsius. Now, as we move out of Wednesday into Thursday, we even start to lose some of that warmth into the southeast corner as the colder air starts to sink its way south. So once again, the British Isles is underneath that blue, the cooler air mass, and that has an impact to the feel of the weather, particularly out to the east. There'll be some showers, a cool north to northeasterly breeze, meaning temperatures struggling to get into double figures. So therefore, the best of the sunshine and the best of the warmth, even though it'll be a little disappointing, will certainly be further west. Take care.
Many cinemas are closed again, but films are still being released, including to stream. I'll keep you up to date on what you've been enjoying in The Film Review, Friday evening at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel and on BBC iPlayer.
afternoon. This is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. A look at our latest headlines at 4 o'clock. No let up for the Prime Minister as more questions are raised over who paid to renovate his Downing Street flat. But ministers are supporting Boris Johnson.
The only information I have is that the Prime Minister has paid for this and he's made that very clear.
Boris Johnson has to offer a full and frank explanation. He has to be transparent. If he's got nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear.
The first shipment of British medical aid arrives in India as coronavirus infections and deaths there reach record highs.
It's difficult quite often if you're in a country where things are improving, the feeling is, oh, it looks good. But if in worldwide terms, we're at our most intense transmission ever.
Researchers say lockdowns and other COVID restrictions adversely affect the speech development of young children. Some schools are now offering additional support.
You have now a total of 28 points.
Thank you. And this 24-year-old student from Glasgow survives the black chair and becomes the youngest ever winner of Mastermind. Hello, good afternoon. The Prime Minister is coming under increasing pressure after several allegations of his personal conduct in office. There are renewed questions this afternoon over who paid for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat. The spokesman has again declined to say whether Boris Johnson received a loan from the Conservative Party to cover the costs, but insisted that he has fully complied with all guidance. Well, the Prime Minister chaired a cabinet meeting today as he attempted to shift the focus away from personal controversies. Here's our political correspondent Helen Catt.
The government is keen to dismiss a number of rows, including how Boris Johnson funded a revamp of his home in Downing Street, as just a bit of Westminster curtain switching that doesn't interest the world outside. This morning, he urged cabinet ministers to focus on jabs and jobs.
The only information I have is that the Prime Minister has paid for this and he's made that very clear in his own words. So it's a case of there's a lot of discussion perhaps that really interests people, particularly in the Westminster and media, about aspects of redecoration, whether it's wallpaper or armchairs or whatever it is. But I think the vast majority of people in this country are very keen about what it is we're doing in order to protect livelihoods.
Most Prime Ministers do up the Downing Street flat to suit their tastes, but this isn't a row about soft furnishings or wallpaper. It's about having a clear public record of who is interacting with the people who run the country. The suggestion is that a donation or a loan was made to Boris Johnson to help him pay for his redecoration costs. Now, that in itself wouldn't be likely to break the rules, as long as it is properly declared. So far, no declaration has been made. Labour says if there's nothing to hide, then Boris Johnson should just be clear.
There's a reason why we have rules around donations and loans to government ministers, why they have to be declared, because ministers have to be beyond, they have to be above reproach. And we don't know the situation here. So again, Boris Johnson has to offer a full and frank explanation. He has to be transparent. If he's got nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear. But so far, his behaviour suggests something fishy is going on. Well, that's not good enough.
Downing Street says if a loan or donation was made, it will be declared in due course, probably in the Register of Ministers' Interests. The Cabinet Secretary is reviewing how the flat refurbishment was funded.
The reason why we have these rules around transparency is so that the public know who decision makers, up to and including the Prime Minister, what their interests are, and to be clear that they are acting on behalf of the people, on behalf of citizens, on behalf of taxpayers, and that they're not overly influenced by donations or loans or private interests from anybody else.
Has the Prime Minister broken the rules, Mr. Raab?
No, says the Foreign Secretary. But all the time there remain answers that are unclear. The questions will keep on coming. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Let's get more on this with our political correspondent Jonathan Blake. Something fishy is going on, that's what Labour says. Let's just go through these various allegations in a bit more detail. Let's start off with the refurbishment of the Downing Street flat. And the Prime Minister's still under fire on this.
Yes, the key questions here are how much was spent on the refurbishment of the flat above number 11 Downing Street where Boris Johnson lives with his fiancée Carrie Simons, and where the money came from. Now, Prime Ministers get up to £30,000 of public money to spend on the upkeep of their living quarters each year. The figures for the last financial year, which would take in Boris Johnson's first full year in office, have not yet been published. But if we take it as read that he spent the maximum amount and then topped it up with further funds, the question arises, where did that come from? Now, on Friday, the government said for the first time that the Prime Minister had personally met the costs of refurbishment work in Downing Street, but there are questions about a possible loan or donation to the Conservative Party which was used for that purpose. And those questions were turbocharged on Friday when the Prime Minister's former senior advisor Dominic Cummings published his blog in which he talked of a possible secret plan from Boris Johnson to get donors to pay for the work. Now, a loan in itself would not be against any rules, but it would need to be declared, and that for Boris Johnson's critics is the issue here, the lack of clarity around that. The key intervention today, we heard from the Prime Minister's official spokesman on this at lunchtime, facing further questions. He said that any costs of the wider refurbishment in number 10 have been met by the Prime Minister, and he has acted in accordance with the appropriate codes of conduct and electoral law. Let's just have a quick look at what those key points of electoral law and conduct are. Political parties have to report any donations or loans above £7,500. MPs have to report any financial contributions within 28 days, any donations which could influence them. And the government each year is supposed to twice yearly publish a list of ministers' financial interests. It last did that in July 2020. The next publication, which is awaiting the appointment of the Prime Minister's independent advisor on ministerial standards, could contain the key details that would fill in the missing parts of this puzzle.
Okay, so that's the row over the Downing Street flat refurbishment, which has been rumbling on for days now. But let's also then talk about this claim that the Prime Minister said he would rather see bodies piled high than have a second lockdown. Now, tell us more about that and how damaging that could be for the government.
Some very striking language which takes us back to the heated debate in government that there was about whether to impose a second lockdown or not in England, or impose further restrictions in England back in September of last year. And as you say, it has been reported by us here at the BBC and others that Boris Johnson said he would rather see the bodies piled high than impose another lockdown. Now, the Prime Minister was asked about this himself yesterday on camera, and he gave a flat denial, said that he had not said that, and referred to several reports along those lines as rubbish. And today, the Prime Minister's official spokesman was again asked about that phrase that he may or may not have used. And he said that he didn't say it and that it was untrue. So a clear denial there from number 10 about a phrase which Boris Johnson is reported to have used and claimed to have used by several people who were in the vicinity at the time.
And the third strand to all of this is the investigation into who supposedly leaked the plan for the second lockdown, the so-called chatty rat.
Yes, this is an ongoing internal investigation by the most senior civil servant, the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, about who leaked to the media plans to impose a national lockdown in October of last year. And it emerged in the media before there was an official announcement, or before MPs had been told that that was what was going to happen, and there was speculation at the time that had been done to force the Prime Minister's hand. The investigation, which has become known as the Chatty Rat Inquiry, is ongoing, and the Cabinet Secretary himself, Simon Case, was facing questions from MPs on this yesterday, and he sounded sceptical about whether it might actually ever catch the culprit. He said that given that time has now passed, I think it's probable the team will not successfully identify the source or sources. Now, what ties all these things together for Boris Johnson's critics, at least, is that there are issues of trust and issues of transparency. And there are simply things which need answers, questions which need answers. But Boris Johnson is a divisive politician, his supporters and his detractors are equally vocal. I suppose the key question is whether any of this will do anything but to further entrench people on either side, or whether it does anything to influence some of those wavering in the middle.
Jonathan, thank you for all of that. We're going to explore some of those possible implications a bit further now with Henry Hill, who is the news editor of Conservative Home. That's the political website which supports but is independent of the Conservative Party. Thank you for being with us. So we've heard Jonathan laying out there all the various allegations and counterclaims. What does all of this mean, do you think, to the voters out there? Do they care?
Well, this is always the big question, because I think the issue with this is that if you're inside the bubble, like the journalist like me who covers this all of the time, this isn't really telling you anything big that you didn't already know. Yes, there's some salacious details and some interesting quotations and all the rest of it, but what's missing is, we already knew Boris Johnson fought desperately to avoid going back into lockdown. We knew that Rishi Sunak fought going back into lockdown. We know that he has had a toxic falling out with Dominic Cummings, and we already know that there are allegations, I can't say whether they're true or not, about the influence of Carrie Symonds, and so we've not learned anything. So the question is, will this cut through with the public? And my suspicion is that, unfortunately for the opposition, the public still think that the government is getting the big issues right. They still think the vaccine rollout is on plan, the unlocking timetable is on plan, people are getting back out into the pubs and the restaurants, they're meeting up with family members, they're looking forward to the summer. And my suspicion is that as long as that's the case and the public continue to credit the government with that, it will be difficult for the opposition to make this sort of thing stick.
Difficult, but, and it's a big but, Dominic Cummings, the former chief advisor to the Prime Minister, looks like he's got plenty of ammunition left and might be firing off a few more salvos in Downing Street's direction in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. I mean, he's appearing before MPs late next month. This story will certainly run until then. We can expect it to run after that, because it would be very surprising if Dominic Cummings fired all of his ammunition, as you put it, before that event, which he'll want to make into a showpiece, so he'll definitely be holding something back. The question, and that will certainly produce maybe 6 weeks of bad headlines for the government, and no government really wants that. But if we're taking the big picture, long-term view, we're still several years out from the next election. So the question is there anything that's going to make this the sort of story that we're still talking about in 12 months' time, in 2 years' time, or potentially that would maybe force Boris Johnson to depart before that date? Now, it might be that Dominic Cummings has emails, or better still, well, better for him, recordings of Boris Johnson saying some of this stuff, and in that case that will make it much more immediate and it'll be much more likely to cut through. But my suspicion is that if it remains ultimately in the realm of he said versus he said, disgruntled ex-employee versus politician, the Prime Minister will probably be able to tough this out.
It's quite a psychodrama, isn't it, between Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings? I mean, how did things get so bad between the two of them? They used to be joined at the hip, didn't they, in the Brexit campaign and then in Downing Street?
Well, I think the problem is that in the EU referendum campaign, they both had a common goal and they both worked very hard towards achieving it. But their dispositions and outlook and long-term projects are fundamentally different. Dominic Cummings is a very divisive figure, but he's also very driven. He has a very clear idea of why he wanted to be in power and what he wanted to do with power, and that was stuff like civil service reform and all the rest of it. Boris Johnson fundamentally is a very different. He likes consensus, even if he doesn't necessarily generate it. He likes being liked, and the result is that did lead to a clash between Dominic Cummings on the one hand and some other of the Prime Minister's advisors on the other. And I think that for people, Conservative Party supporters, one of the most concerning things about this, notwithstanding any of the details, is the fact that the consistent feature of all of these stories is that Downing Street, which should be full of people we've never really heard of getting on with the job of obeying the Prime Minister, appears to be instead full of people who are battling it out for control of the Prime Minister and the agenda, and that's not how it's supposed to work.
So if you were one of the Prime Minister's advisors now, what would you be saying, what should he be doing in the weeks and months ahead to try and wrestle back control of the political agenda?
Well, don't pick fights with embittered ex-employees with loads of material, would have been my first bit of advice. But if he ignored that, it would then be sort of stop picking this fight. You know, if you want to focus on what people really care about, get past the local elections, and then focus on the vaccines, focus on unlocking, and then the really important stuff, focus on how we're going to transition, do the economic heavy lifting for when this comes to an end, because we're coming up to the point where the government's going to have to start winding down furlough. And if they get that wrong, that could cause serious unemployment. We have to grapple with the impact that lockdown has had on the education of thousands and thousands of children. These are really big issues. Get on with those. Get on with stuff like housing and sort of force this out of the headlines by proactively governing. You've got an overall majority of 80. You can set the agenda if you have the will to do it.
Great to talk to you. Thanks so much. Henry Hill there, news editor at Conservative Home. Thank you. Look at our latest headlines now on BBC News, and there is no let-up for the Prime Minister, with more questions over who did pay to renovate his Downing Street flat, but ministers are supporting Boris Johnson. The first shipment of British medical aid has arrived in India as coronavirus infections and deaths there reach record highs. Researchers say lockdowns and other COVID restrictions adversely affect the speech development of young children. Some schools are now offering additional support. Well, more then on the terrifying situation in India and the first British medical supplies arriving there as the country struggles to deal with that unprecedented surge in coronavirus infections and deaths. The UK has now airlifted ventilators and oxygen equipment, but much more is still needed. And there have been more than 320,000 new infections today alone. The World Health Organization says 3 variants of the virus have contributed to the spread, along with a failure to stop recent large gatherings. Rajini Vaidyanathan has this report.
A collective loss that's hard to process as the pyres keep burning. There's a tragic inevitability in India, because tomorrow these scenes will be the same. Round the clock, volunteers like Jitendra Singh Shampi have been helping to cremate those who've died.
50% of deaths are not registered by the government as COVID-19. Our NGO brings bodies to be cremated directly from homes of victims. The government only counts related deaths of victims who die in a hospital.
He believes the actual death toll is far higher than the official numbers. And in a country dubbed the pharmacy of the world because it produces so many medicines, there isn't enough to go around. Police guard the limited supplies. Families forced to wait for whatever they can. Many feel abandoned by those in power.
The government has failed us so much that those who can normally survive would also die. So many people are dying because they are unable to get the most basic services. This kind of disaster I'm witnessing, I've never seen this level of crisis before.
And in this crisis, help from further afield. Ventilators and oxygen concentrators sent by the UK government arrived in Delhi last night. It's a start, but with the surge in cases, nothing is enough. There's also been offers of help from other countries too. Even regional rivals like China and Pakistan have pledged support. The US is also looking at supplying oxygen, COVID tests and PPE to India. It's also announced it will share up to 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine with other countries as they become available. But for so many families, it's all too late. No cry for help can save what India has already lost. As thousands die every day, more families bear the pain. And they're not alone in their grief. India is a nation in mourning. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News.
Well, I've been discussing the situation in India with Dr. Margaret Harris from the World Health Organization in Geneva, and I asked her what she thinks has gone wrong in India.
It's a combination of factors, but we certainly have seen this kind of conflagration occurring in countries when there has been a desire to believe that they've beaten it, that is the most dangerous moment for any society. But it's more than that. It's certainly relaxation, complacency, exhaustion, resentment of having to continue the measures, but very large mass gatherings combined with different variants circulating, the ones we know of that were detected in South Africa, in the United Kingdom, in Brazil, but also a newer one that's first been detected in India. So all these combinations, all these factors are really adding up to, I don't want to call it a perfect storm, a terrible storm.
It is indeed, and so many governments have warned about the need for restrictions because otherwise the health service will collapse. Well, we're really seeing a kind of example of that in India at the moment, aren't we? Which is horrific
Indeed.
to see, but hospitals that just can't cope.
Yeah, pardon, sorry, I missed that. But we also do know with this virus that if you can reverse it, it takes off very quickly. It spreads in clusters which spark other clusters, so it moves very quickly. But you can also stop it very quickly because it spreads via clusters. So if you can break the chains of transmission, you can stop it quickly. But you have to take, and the whole community has to understand why they need to take the personal protective measures, the strong public health social measures, stop the mass gatherings, stop being in close contact, find every case, isolate everybody who's potentially infectious. It seems impossible when you've got such a huge outbreak, but it can be done, and it has been done in other countries.
And in the short term, what they need there are things like oxygen, medical oxygen, which they've been desperately short of. We've seen some horrific stories about patients who simply can't get enough oxygen, and the outside world is stepping in now, sending in supplies.
Indeed, and this is again why we've been saying all along that this virus is why it's problematic. A lot of people have never really understood that, because for a lot of people they just have a very mild illness or an asymptomatic illness. But if you're at the severe end, you need complex medical care. You need care in a hospital, you need oxygen, and those things are limited. So if you have huge numbers of cases, your 15% of your numbers is people way beyond your capacity to deal with. And this is what we're seeing. And thanks to the UK and everyone else, we too are sending thousands of oxygen concentrators and field hospitals and people. But it is wonderful to see the world standing up and helping. We just need to keep that spirit going throughout this pandemic in terms of getting the vaccines fairly distributed and all the other things fairly distributed so we can end this.
I mean, how would you characterise the pandemic now on a global scale? We're seeing countries like the UK, for example, where the vaccination rollout, as you say, has been successful and the death rate's coming down very sharply. But generally, around the world, what is the virus doing?
Around the world, worldwide, we're in our most intense, in our most severe state we have ever been. So it's difficult quite often if you're in a country where things are improving, the feeling is, oh, it looks good. But in worldwide terms, we're at our most intense transmission ever. The numbers are higher than ever. The acceleration in cases is higher than ever, and sadly, the numbers of deaths are higher than ever.
That's Dr. Margaret Harris of the World Health Organization in Geneva. And we've just got in the latest coronavirus figures for the United Kingdom from the government, so we can show those to you now. And let's start off with the number of people testing positive, and that's 2,685, as you can see there. That's a rise compared to yesterday, which was 2,064, so a rise of a few hundred there. And in terms of deaths within 28 days of a positive test, 17 deaths reported compared to 6 yesterday. And vaccinations, we've got that. And now in terms of the first dose vaccinations, almost 34 million now have had first dose, 33,843,580. And second dose, more than 13 million, 13,201,811. So the vaccine rollout continuing. Every lockdown fine handed out should be reviewed, according to a committee of MPs. They say the system is muddled, discriminatory and unfair. Well, more than 85,000 fixed penalty notices have been issued in England since the pandemic began. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly has been telling me more about the background.
Now, this committee of MPs is made up, so I should say, not just of MPs, there's members of the House of Lords on there as well, all parties, so it's a real cross-section. They say one of the basic problems is that the system is not clear legally, which poses difficulties for the police. And then they say the system's now been in place obviously for about a year. They say that it's prejudice, they believe, against certain groups, notably the poor, the young and some ethnic minorities. And they say the reason why they're saying that is because if you don't or can't pay the fine, you then have to go to court. And they are saying that's how people are ending up in the court system. They're also quoting stats that say those who've ended up in the court system, a quarter of those cases have actually been thrown out of court, which the peers and MPs would say underlines the fact that there are problems with the system, that basically people are being having action taken against them where they shouldn't be. So that's what they say, the whole system is completely wrong and needs a review.
All right, so that's what the MPs and the peers are saying. What do the government say in response to that? Is there likely to be any review of all these fines?
Well, certainly the mood music, no. I would say what the government says is that they've worked closely with the police throughout the pandemic to get the system going. And they say it's right, the quote is that it's right that those who are very obviously breaching the rules should face the consequences. Their point is that most people have been following the rules. Why should people who they say are not following the rules, why shouldn't they be punished?
June Kelly there, our Home Affairs correspondent. The inquest into the deaths of Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones in the attack at Fishmongers Hall in London have been told that their killer was involved in extremist bullying in prison. Convicted terrorist Usman Khan attacked the two graduates at an educational event in November 2019. Well, our correspondent Zoe Conway has given me this update from the inquest at London's Guildhall.
The inquest has been hearing from Detective Chief Inspector Dan Brown of the Metropolitan Police. He's carrying out an investigation into the Fishmongers Hall attack. And as part of this investigation, he's been looking into the background of Usman Khan, and in particular, Usman Khan's time in prison. Usman Khan was a convicted terrorist who'd spent 8 years in prison and was released just 1 year before carrying out that attack. What we heard from DCI Dan Brown was that throughout his time in prison, Usman Khan was considered to be a Category A high-risk prisoner. To put that into context, there are only 100 prisoners with that categorisation who are considered to be that dangerous. The jury was told that Usman Khan associated with high-profile terrorists in prison, including Michael Adebolajo, who murdered Fusilier Lee Rigby, and the two of them had discussed their Muslim faith. He was also involved in violent assaults in prison. In one case, the assault involved a Christian prisoner who had refused to convert to Islam. And the jury was also told that there was intelligence that Usman Khan had deliberately lied to the prison authorities to fool them into thinking that he changed his ways. We also heard about the management of Usman Khan in the community in the months leading up to the Fishmongers Hall attack. And we were told that there were 3 meetings convened by the agencies who were responsible for managing him, and that included the prison and the probation service. And the jury was told that at 3 of those meetings, the fact that Usman Khan was attending this conference at Fishmongers Hall was discussed, and that according to the minutes, what they talked about was how he was going to get to the conference and how he was going to get home again to Stafford. But according to the minutes, what was not discussed was the level of risk, the risk associated with Usman Khan attending that conference.
Zoe Conway reporting there. Now, the Queen has been photographed carrying out an official public engagement, the first since the death of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, earlier on this month. The Queen, who is 95, held virtual audiences at Windsor Castle via video link earlier today with the ambassadors of Latvia and the Ivory Coast. Right, we're going to pause and take a look at the latest weather forecast for you now. That comes today from Louise Lear.
Hello there. Our weather story has changed. Yes, there's a rare sighting of April showers out there at the moment. And as we go through the afternoon, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder and a little bit of hail. This was North Yorkshire just a few hours ago. Most of the showers so far have been to the north across eastern Scotland, eastern England. Some are drifting their way into Northern Ireland, northwest England and North Wales, with the best of the sunshine across the south coast into the southeast corner. That's where we'll have the best of the warmth. But noticeably
going to end the stream now.
When you factor in the showers and the blustering wind as well. Those showers will drift their way steadily south and west overnight tonight. So we start the day off tomorrow with a different emphasis. More cloud, more showers through Wales, the Midlands and down into southern England. There'll be some sunshine through Northern Ireland and Scotland along with northern England, but those temperatures pretty disappointing for this time of year. A maximum of just 8 to 14 degrees, and that cool trend continues for the rest of the week.